In the kingdom of the blind, we have just witnessed a most remarkable opera bouffe, or comedy of political mores, and this time the elections brilliantly deserve their reputation as a con game. Beyond all those who let themselves fall into this trap, the electoral system as a whole, and therefore the democratic system of representation, was beaten at its own game. Everything began with the growing indifference to politics. I do not mean among professionals. In the added indifference, since indifference itself has become a reference, a culture of indifference that is not far from becoming the only true social bond. The first attempted diversion. People are not indifferent to politics, but to its spectacle and general corruption. Wrong. The spectacle of political degeneration fascinates people. It fascinates us. They have become indifferent to politics, to the very principle of representation, and this indifference is most certainly combined with their indifference to their own lives. Thus it is neither an accident nor a superficial phenomenon. It may even be a gut reaction of apathy in the face of the general harassment aimed at making us responsible for everything. Montesquieu once said that the people can become so enlightened that they are no longer indifferent to anything. Well, it seems that the people are just enlightened enough to choose to remain indifferent to certain things and to avoid the mortal danger of being concerned by anything. By arranging to exclude the Front National from any national representation, the dominant political class has exposed itself, totally blindly, and for over 20 years, to the risk that this exclusion could become a weapon and infiltrate society like a virus. Right and left have become one and the same. There is no hint of a solution in exorcising Le Pen by denying him existence, no more than there is a chance of eradicating terrorism by exterminating the Taliban. Le Pen thrives on exclusion from the system of representation, and any reinforced exclusion strengthens him, just as any censored image automatically becomes erotic. Anti-democratic ideologies can easily be fought and disqualified, but that is not the point. The point is the general unease with representation, present even among the Democrats and anti-fascists. By excluding the Front National, we allow it benefits from all the potential of this unease. It becomes the flashpoint for all of this latent indifference and ends up embodying the violent political countertransference of society toward itself. By being off limits, it becomes the emblem not only of everything that is not represented or representable, but also of everything that may no longer want to be represented. This forms a vast, elusive potential that can crystallize at any place and at any time, and the political class, by definition, cannot and will not take it into account. It can only submit to its electric shock from time to time, as it did in the recent elections. But this will not teach it anything, because it will continue to think that everything is due to the naivete or the stupidity of a part of the population that should simply be democratically pushed back into the shadows. The only intelligent strategy, politically speaking, would obviously be to integrate the Front National into the system of representation. But even this would be pointless, because Le Pen embodies something other than political ideas or the resentment of a single category, something persistent and obscure that resists political reasoning and feeds off this very dissidence. This is obvious when we see that, with the whole world against him, Le Pen has raked in the winnings without a fight. This is what gives him his self-assurance and air of triumph. He does not have to be credible because he does not represent anything, because he is nothing. And yet, by being nothing, he embodies it perfectly while the others mournfully shoulder the burden of representation. He is at once the absolute mockery and the truth of the situation. Le Pen is a very subtle père ubu, since he forced the left, in a turn of ferocious irony, to vote for Chirac, reducing them to the humiliating situation of kneeling in suspenders. By electing the right through its own opponents, Le Pen deprived it of any real legitimacy, thus making the two conflicting parties take each other hostage and mutually disqualify each other. He does not even have to try. He simply exploited the logic of representation. The left could only vote against itself in the second round, and Chirac could only govern in a vacuum, since he no longer knows who he represents. In fact, Le Pen is a real terrorist, like those of September 11th. He turned the weapons of exclusion against the system of power, just as they turned Boeings into flying bombs aimed at the towers. It was a veritable attack on the twin towers of left and right, and just as the September 11th terrorists turned their deaths into an absolute weapon, Le Pen turned the virtual divide between representatives and represented, the exclusion at the heart of the current democratic structure, into a master weapon against the entire political class. And the legislative elections will re-establish the Holy Alliance to erase this blow, just as the war in Afghanistan will have served to exercise the September 11th attacks and restore world order. All discussions of Le Pen are apotropaic. They are aimed at warding off his evil, erasing his existence, and above all, spreading the belief that he is nothing. Which, as we have seen, is painfully true, because that is his force, being this spiral paunch, this paladin, this pataphysical specter of corruption and derision. Remember the general relief when the front suddenly split in 1998 as if by magic? We told you so, it was nothing, we didn't have to do anything. It fell apart on its own. Too bad. Now the exact opposite is true. The left and right have fallen apart by ruining their representative credit and no longer having an imaginary enemy to comfort them in their democratic status. It is always the same dubious analysis, this timorous evocation of objective causes, growing insecurity, poor voting by the disenfranchised, the incompetent of the political classes, irresponsible abstention, etc., with added shame, democratic affliction. We have the shame, say the same youth from the ghettos who once shouted, we have the hate. Instead of that, the entire political class should congratulate itself for undergoing this trial of truth, giving it some chance of survival, if not of resuscitation. In the meantime, it has done everything to write itself off. Worst of all is that it has succeeded in dragging the entire population into its misery and affliction, forcing that population to mechanically and sentimentally save a political class in which it no longer believes.